Thank you. Everyone can hear me? Great. I'm going to be talking about fear and being things to be afraid of. So it's slightly different. Actually, sort of how to diffuse fear. I'm going to start with, there we go. Okay, so this was my childhood in a suburb of, a very white suburb of Chicago. I don't remember anyone smiling that much, but we did have the TV, watched a lot of TV. So I grew up in a suburb that was extremely, extremely homogenous. And I actually have a friend who still lives there, and he was telling me a couple years ago, oh, you know, it's really changed, it's getting a lot more diverse. So I checked the census statistics, and there's a higher percentage of white people in my town that I grew up in than the percentage of Finns in Finland. So really not that diverse. So to me, racial violence, you know, mass riots or lynchings, that was vaguely discussed in my education. I grew up theoretically well-educated, spent my whole life in Chicago up to the age of 18, then went off to college. Never learned about a massive race riot that took place and upended the city of Chicago. Never learned about it. And so as this obsession with trying to figure out what is race and what is American history, I was always very interested in American history. And in college, I went to Africa and spent some time in Kenya, where I learned all the prejudices, the racial prejudices that we have here in the United States, exactly transferred to different tribal groups in Kenya. Exactly. I remember when I first arrived there, I was sent to the border of Uganda, and I was put in with a family, an African family, and my father and that family was taking me around the market. And he said to me, look at that black guy over there. You know, if you drop a coin, that guy's going to pick it up and coup you. And I looked over at a sea of black people. I had no idea what he was talking about. But after a few months, I could discern it all. And then I came back to the United States, and I could see all the same prejudices that we have here are applied to countries all over the world. And racial violence is a massive problem. Ethnic divisions, racial and ethnic violence is a constant problem. Look what's happening in the Crimea. So, then I ended up with Eritrean rebels. I won't go into great detail, but I ended up after college on a fellowship, and I was with rebels in Eritrea, and they had the same ethnic divisions that they were trying to sort out in their battles with the Ethiopians. And it became something that was constantly resurfacing as I got older and older. Then I went into journalism. I never smoked a cigar, but I actually didn't wear that hat either. But I went into journalism, which a lot of people say is, you know, it's a difficult profession, you don't get paid a lot. True, but it's also incredibly awesome. It's a great, great profession because you have a passport to anywhere. You can go anywhere and you get to meet all kinds of people. And that's what I loved about it, and I still love about it. And I got to go to the Horn of Africa, where I encountered lots of racial and ethnic division and violence. I went to Bosnia, which is where people were being killed after years and years of socialist government in which there were no, which religion was frowned upon. People were being killed simply for the suffix of their last name. They looked exactly like everyone else. There were people, I went to Central America, I went to other places, always running into racial violence. History of racial violence constantly reoccurring. Every city that where I've worked as a reporter in the United States, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, Atlanta, every one of them, if you study the history of those cities, there is a massive race riot that took place. And there are numerous lynchings that have occurred all over the country. So this really became something I was constantly thinking about. Why does this happen? How does this happen? I remember interviewing people in Sarajevo and just saying, you know, we've lived our whole lives under this socialist government, and we never thought this would ever happen. We never thought these ethnic divisions would bubble up, and they exploded. So, I got the chance in 2006 to go to Harvard. They have a fellowship there for journalists, and you have to write a project as to what you're going to do there. And I decided I'm going to study race riots in American history. And if you do that, pretty quickly you figure out that there's been a major race riot in American history in every decade since the Republic was founded, at least once. And there are numerous lynchings that no one will ever even know about because they were, but there's tons that we do know about, thousands. And as I was doing my research, I very quickly focused on 1919, which was the largest the spate of anti-black riots that ever took place in this country. It was a very frenetic and scary time in American history. You had, it was right after World War I, the economy was collapsing, there were diseases all over the place, there was fear of communism, anarchy, and racial tensions exploded. This is a cartoon from that period. You can see the world there, pulling the blanket up while all these terrible things are happening around them. It's not unlike today, frankly, where there's constant tensions, and then the racial divisions that people don't really notice day to day suddenly rip open. And in the riots that I was studying, whether it was during this period or earlier or after, invariably the government officials would say after it occurred, "I can't believe it, everybody was getting along, I don't understand this, how did it happen?" And they'd always try to say, well, it's the communists, or black agitators were causing trouble, even though most of the riots that I researched were not caused by black people. They were white mobs attacking either black individuals or black communities. And in the breadth of American history, if we went outside right now and started asking people on the street, what's a race riot to you? Explain a race riot. They would probably say something like, it's when it's black kids breaking into a Korean shoe store in Los Angeles or something. When in the breadth of American history, the vast majority of race riots that took place in this country were white mobs attacking black individuals or communities. So, I wrote a book about it, about 1919, and in my research, I came across this guy, this Herbert Sullivan. He was a little Jewish guy who decided to work for the NAACP from New York, and they sent him out to go undercover, sort of. They would send him to, when there was a massive riot and lynching in Vicksburg, Mississippi, they sent him down to go undercover and start talking to the white people there about what had happened, which is pretty risky for a little Jewish guy from New York to go to Vicksburg, Mississippi and interview people and then write a big report about it, which is what he did. And after 1919, after all these riots took place all across the country, he wrote a book. And in this book, he made this comment. The racial violence of 1919 was so terrible a commentary on our civilization as to be forgotten as it was passed, almost as it was passed. So everybody just wanted to forget about it. And part of the main function of me writing this book was to try to begin to have people start to remember these events. And I began to realize that the amnesia is very profound. People don't want to remember that this ever occurred. And they don't want to remember that racial violence occurs. As soon as it's over, people just want to move on and never look back at it again. And these were major events at the time. You had, the country was terrified. And this isn't, I'm focusing on 1919, but again, these events were happening all over the country pretty regularly. These were just the incidents, these are the major incidents that occurred in 1919. And as you can see, they were everywhere. And we're not talking about small towns necessarily. San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, D.C., There was gunfire right outside of the White House. Went on for days. This city, small town of Corbin, Kentucky, all the black people in the town were basically told to leave town. They had 24 hours to get out. This is a map that I created for this talk, just of some of the race riots that have occurred and major mass lynchings that occurred in the United States that are unmarked, that nobody's ever discussed. There's no, people have written books about it, but there's no public marker, there's no events that take place to discuss it, no symposium on it, no community acknowledgement of it at all. The biggest one to me is Chicago. There's a little plaque now that a little school put up, but that was a major riot that lasted for days. State National Guard had to come in to stop the rioting. No one really knows how many people were eventually killed in all these riots, but they were, it's in the thousands. And tens of thousands of people had their lives disrupted. And it's as though it never happened. And so then we have incidents where, look at the way the country responded to Trayvon Martin, the different way that different parts of our country responded to that incident. Whatever you think of that incident or how it took place, look at how divided we were suddenly, as if everyone was suddenly surprised. Like, what? I can't believe it. And this is true. These incidents, there's racial tensions. I can guarantee you there are racial tensions right now in every one of these cities. But I also guarantee you that black or white, or Hispanic or Asian, people don't know about most people don't know about these incidents. And they played a major role in shaping where people live, what kind of jobs they have, how they interact, etc. So, these are three little places. Atlanta is one of them. Hamburg, South Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, where people have started to do some work to rehabilitate, to reconcile these events and discuss them openly, and even put up some markers to acknowledge that they took place. So I thought I'd discuss some of them. Atlanta had, in 1906, had a major riot here. How many people knew that? Major race riot in this city. Okay, all right, some people know that. That incident most people have no idea that it ever took place or why it ever occurred or how it was stopped. There's no public marker that I'm aware of that ever acknowledged that ever happened. There's the grave of one man who was killed, an African American who was killed. I've been to that grave. It says that he was murdered. He says he was killed in this incident on this date, but that's it. There is a large statue on Marietta Street to Henry Grady, who was the editor of the Atlanta Constitution, who was by no means, by modern standards, racially progressive, but he did make some remarks saying Southerners, black and white, should get together and work toward improving the economy. So when this riot occurred in 1906, some of the white rioters killed two black men and dumped their bodies at the base of the statue to say, no, we're not going to work, we aren't going to cooperate with African Americans in this city. So a group on the centennial of this event gathered and led walks. They still occasionally do walking tours of what happened and where things happened in downtown Atlanta. They held symposia about what happened. There's still no markers acknowledging where things took place, but there was an effort here that I think was helpful to acknowledge that it happened. I mentioned the school. This is a very small plaque. And after I wrote my book, the school teacher who helped organize it in Chicago came and he sent me an email and we talked about him putting this plaque up, and the difficulty he had getting the Chicago Park District to even let him put it on a little rock next to the lake near where the race riot in Chicago started. It started when in 1919 when some black young men, teenagers, drifted. They were on a little buoy and they drifted into what was a de facto segregated white beach. And a white man threw a stone, hit one of the black boys, and he drowned. And when they found his body and pulled it up, the riot started. And went on for at least 5 days. But this is the only acknowledgement that ever took place in the city of Chicago. This is an interesting story. This is where I'll wind up. So I start my book in Carswell Grove, at the Carswell Grove Baptist Church in Jenkins County, Georgia. Anybody ever been to Jenkins County? I'm guessing no. It's pretty remote, pretty rural, south of Augusta. This is the church that was built on the ashes of a destroyed church when the white mob in the county rioted in 1919 after there was a shooting incident. And they burned the church, they killed several African Americans, they rampaged around the county. And so it sort of started this period of violence, so I began the book with this incident. And when I was researching this book, no one would talk to me about it. I had real trouble finding anybody who would even remotely acknowledge that it happened. They were afraid of it to this day to discuss it. I interviewed a guy who was a deacon there. He was in his 60s. And this is what he said to me. So when I was a kid, they did everything to smother the story. Now nobody alive really knows about it. I've heard a bunch of stories, but I'd like to know what really happened. Whites don't want to remember it, and most black people try to forget about it too. And he went on to say that he thought it had all been kept in the dark. And then he said, maybe it's time to turn the lights on. And so that was part of the reason for writing the book. But after the book came out, another deacon contacted me from this small church and said he's starting a campaign now he wanted me to help him he set up a committee to refurbish this church, and he's joined with the local Sons of Confederate Veterans group, because there was a battle nearby, who also wants to do some preservation, and local historians and a local Republican politician. And there's a committee now that is trying to raise money to put up markers, to acknowledge what happened here, to fix the church, to create an historic space that people can, in this county where this story has never been discussed, can now discuss it. And they've had several talks, they've had open meetings about it. And I think this is sort of a way forward for, I think it would, in the long run, will improve racial cooperation, and it will make us a freer nation if we can breathe easier about these issues. And they can also, there's some argument that if you have race, if you discuss racial tensions and divisions too much, it makes everybody nervous, and it makes everybody tense, and everybody takes sides. And their argument is if you just keep going forward, eventually it'll go away. And there's some argument to that. I mean, my Scottish ancestors were really harassed for being Presbyterians, and the Church of Scotland harassed them, and I frankly don't care. I don't even know what they were arguing about. So stuff can go away. But if we think that racial and ethnic violence and tension is going to go away just by ignoring it, you're wrong. It has a quicksilver element to it that it's constantly resurfacing. And when you think it's gone, it's not. And if we have public space, almost like a beltline type approach to acknowledging that these incidents took place, creating historic markers, even statues to some of the great people who tried to stop it. I'm thinking, for example, of a man named James Weldon Johnson, who was a sort of a fascinating African American who worked with the NAACP. There's no statue in the country to him. and he really worked hard to make sure that this violence didn't recur. There's a man named Edward Smith, who was a white mayor of Omaha, Nebraska, who, when there was a massive race riot in 1919, went out and told the mob, if you're trying to lynch this man inside the jail, you're going to have to kill me first. And they almost did kill him. And there's no marker for him. I mean, we need to, these aren't all horror stories. These are stories that involve horror, but have a lot of heroes in them too. But the closer we come to acknowledging it and to adding it, to including it into our historic space, the better off I think we'll be as a nation.